through decades of research, the pain management clinic had discovered that there was this way of being with the pain and responding to it differently. The very idea that I could have an influence over how what I assume to be autonomous systems, and have discovered that in fact is the case, such that now, I relate to the pain completely differently. It's not this terrible thing at
Mm.
all.
Basically, the pain is there, but then you
Mm,
choose to relate to it differently.
yes, it's that simple.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. Another episode, and I have Wayne Stickel today with me, one of the great people in our community. The topic today is going to be on pain management, and disability, and how is being experienced, especially in the workplace and in general in life. Wayne, please introduce yourself.
Thanks so much, Ashkan. Yeah, how to introduce myself these days. So these days, I guess I'm partially retired, still working on Mighty Ability, my business, and looking to create new ways of supporting people living with chronic pain and disability, both in the community, in the workplace, and in other areas. Because as someone who lives with chronic pain and disability, I know how challenging it can be. Not only is there all of these things that I need to deal with, we all need to deal with on a daily basis in managing pain and disability. But there's these deeper parts which seem to be the source of most of the suffering, I think. So that's kind of what I've learned up until this point. So so these days I'm living in my mobile home, traveling around, and continuing to study and research so I can further develop my skills to be of more value to the community. So yeah.
Tell people what you do. What's your background?
Yeah, sure. So I spent about 20 years working in corporate technology sales for a large IT solutions business. I was responsible for maybe about $25 million in gross profit per annum with the business. And so it was a really great learning curve for me in terms of understanding how the corporate environment, certainly in Australia, works. Um, when I left there after 20 odd years, it was largely because of the challenges I was starting to experience with my health, and I looked to other areas where I could continue to, bring value to people, and coaching, training seemed like a good opportunity to me. So, I started that journey about 13 years ago, and it was probably maybe 3 years ago now that I had this incident where I'd been working with businesses and I really wasn't getting the results that I was hoping for, either for my clients or for myself. And I had this moment, like an epiphany, where I realized that the thing that was there for me to do, like a calling from inside, was to work with people like myself, with people with disabilities. I realized that I'd been through such a lot that I had so much to contribute. And I think it not so much on the physical side. I mean, I'm not a physiotherapist. I'm not a doctor. But I am someone who has looked deeply into what it takes to live a fulfilling life, and moreover, how do I need to operate in life? And it's like, how do I need to be in life to have this you know fulfilled experience when I'm dealing with these overwhelming things? And I realized that there was probably many people out there that were also dealing with these deeper levels of you know self-doubt, lack of confidence, um, you know maybe some self-loathing, self-hatred,
Mm,
lack of acceptance about the circumstances they might be dealing with. And I say all that because I've been through all that myself, and it's not pleasant. And
yeah,
I've realised that it was largely a lot of the choices I was making in relation to how I was looking at myself, and a lack of
yeah,
understanding about what was really going on internally. And so yes, through this
sure,
journey, I guess I've been able to look very deeply into that.
sure. So you already touched on it. Like, how is it like to live with disability?
Mm. Yeah, that's. I mean, I think I guess it's going to be very subjective. Um, my experience is that whilst we all live with very similar um, circumstances sometimes, the way we relate to those circumstances can be different. So I think for me, I actually just there's been a couple of incidents in the last week that I'd like to share because it's kind of highlighted to me maybe some of the challenges. Um, One incident was I was taking some rubbish from my mobile home over to the bins, and I have an electric bike, so I'd put the rubbish on the bike and put the bottles in the bag on the side, and I'd got on my electric bike to go over to the bin, which was only about 100 meters away, and there was this older couple that had just pulled up in their van, and the lady looked at me and sort of with almost distaste and said, "You're not going to ride your bike over there, are you? Like you could walk." And I turned around and said, "Actually, well, I can't. I mean, I could, but this bike that I have is literally my legs." Now, I felt really uncomfortable having to just, have this conversation with this person, and I felt slightly resentful afterwards that she would say something like that to me. But I realised she just didn't understand. She looked at me and thought, like anyone would think, that he's okay, and why isn't he doing what everyone else would do? And and it was only a few days later I had another similar incident where I was at a shopping mall and I parked in a disability spot. And when I left, I came out and there was this gentleman helping his elderly mother into the car in the spot next to mine. As I got in the car, he looked at me and didn't look very happy with me. And I didn't really understand why. I thought maybe I'd done something to upset him, or maybe yeah, I know I was just very concerned because I could see he was looking after his elderly mother. And so I asked him, was there something that I'd done that had upset him? He didn't answer. He just became more and more aggressive towards me. I was at that point literally pleading with him. I said, "Look, I'm this sort of person that doesn't want to go around doing things that causes other people issues. So if you could please tell me, I would then not only not do this to you again, but I would not do it to someone else." He then turned around and with a very, angry face and almost a clenched fist asked me where my disability parking sticker was. And when I pointed out to him it was in the window where it was supposed to be, not only did he not apologise or just acknowledge that, he actually became more angry at me. And I left there thinking, I'm this person who can have conversations with people to find out what's going on and make an assessment as to whether or not I've done, I've transgressed someone. But I thought about all the other people that maybe don't have as much nous as I do, who might be left in situations where they're feeling discriminated against, judged, made wrong, made to feel inferior. If you can tell, that's how I felt, and then not take that on board, not have that make it not have because I can even feel myself making it mean something about me, that this person
Yeah.
thinks I'm a rip-off merchant, like I'm a cheater, I'm a cute, these terrible things, and
So
you
basically,
can tell it's
you
upsetting.
you're talking about this judgment that like the people that they wouldn't have a sense of what it is like to deal with disability would have. Yeah. Now,
Yeah.
so one of the things that it's quite important to, I think, to pay attention to is one of the major theories behind the consciousness is quite linked to the fact that we can suffer. We have this capability of suffering,
Mm.
and basically we say that whatever can suffer, then it's conscious. Yeah. So now, and then, many of the work that we do in terms of, let's say, progress, whatever that's supposed to mean, or for example, welfare, many of
Yeah.
these modern constructs that we have created in modern societies, and we
Yeah.
take them quite seriously, is basically to reduce the amount of suffering, or at least minimize the amount of unnecessary suffering.
Yeah.
So now, when it comes to, I mean, like everyone suffers in one way or another. Suffering is a kind of inevitable part of life. But when it comes to people with disability, whether that disability is something apparent, visible, like everyone can see from outside, or sometimes is subtle and invisible.
Yeah.
So so, as a person with disability, you're going to experience the suffering perhaps way more. Yeah. It
Hmm.
depends on the circumstances, conditions that you deal with.
Yeah.
Now, what do you do with that suffering? that extra
Uh,
suffering.
yeah, yeah. So I could hear in as I was expressing to you those incidents that there is suffering still going on there for me. So there's this emotional turmoil internally, which is this sense of being, of injustice. Yeah, this sense of
Mm,
being treated differently or unfairly. So,
yeah.
what do I do with that? I mean, I'll get onto other suffering in a bit, like specifically around suffering related to pathological or neuropathic pain or chronic pain. The emotional suffering, though, I think for me, it's the learning. It's and I want to thank you a lot for the conversations we've had around surrender.
Yeah.
I've learned that trying to take those feelings and deal with them myself can sometimes be like a vicious circle, trying to rationalize, understand, justify, make sense of, rather
Mm,
than perhaps just taking ownership of, well, this is how I'm feeling, and do I really need to do anything about it? And I had this sense recently where I felt like I had tremendous, I can seem to manifest anytime I want this internal turmoil, like this wrestling that's going on. And I asked myself the other day, what are you fighting against, Wayne? What are you
mm,
wrestling against? And in that moment, I realized that it was me that was doing the wrestling with myself. And in that
yeah.
moment, I decided to just let go. Now, in the surrender, there was this sense of loss of control. It was a little bit, I remember it was a little scary. I felt like I was going to, like, if I let this go, if I just let myself be this way, what's going to happen? And there was this
Mm,
fear and anxiety. And then what happened after that was peace, actually.
mm,
I was surprised to find that there was peace. So
yeah.
it's been this, for me, this is ongoing, continuing to learn the things that I'm holding on to and trying to rationalize and overcome, versus those things that I can actually just let go of. And of course, it reminds me of the serenity prayer of being able to influence the things that I can, but
Yeah.
not make any attempt to influence the things I can't, and just accept those things. And living with chronic pain, it's not something that I can physically change, although I have learned that I can
Yeah.
influence it.
Yeah.
So that's where I think that was a real revelation to me, is that I could influence the way I experience pain. I think when I
Yeah.
learned that, I thought, wow, that's gold, because now I'm not at the mercy of something I can't change. There's
Yeah.
something about this that I can influence. And that only came through, you
So
talked about consciousness before, that only came through awareness, learning,
yeah.
looking, discovering. Mm.
Yeah. Do you um often go through like resentment and become bitter
Yeah.
and challenge the everything existence, like, because there seem to be it appears to be kind of unfairness going on, then
Yeah.
you go, why me?
Mm-hmm.
I remember there was this interview with the Stephen Fry, where, like, as an atheist, then the interviewer was asking him, if there was God and you were in front of God after life, what would you tell God? And he started with saying, like, how dare you? And creating such a world full of suffering, and children with cancer, etc., etc.
Yeah.
So when you're dealing with tremendous amount of pain as a manifestation of suffering, that extra suffering,
Mm.
life and experience of existence may become a kind of burden that you need to carry. So you may not being able to live life with grace,
Mm.
without
Yeah.
resentment. That's
Yeah.
a possibility. I'm pretty sure you have experienced a degree of that. You know,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
and it's totally understandable. But what is the antidote to that? How you can be responsible around it instead of being this passive victim that life is occurring to you.
Yeah. So I
Yeah.
think, how can you start to take ownership of this situation where you're having an experience of being in life, and you've got, I mean, I'm experiencing pain, which can be quite intense. And there certainly is, even this morning, I recall being here thinking, how am I going, how am I going to get through the day, let alone the next 20 years? You know, it's just thought of, this is what it's like now. It's ridiculous. Ridiculous. How am I going to do this today? Let alone for the next. It seemed impossible. Uh, it seemed impossible, and yet here I am, and I'm not thinking that way anymore. I think at the moment, in the time that it's happening, it really is about being. We talk about awareness in the being ontological framework as being conscious of your consciousness, and I think that has been the most helpful thing for me, is to be able to see my mental model, see the way that I'm processing information, see the outrageous things I'm telling myself, which I know not to be true, and yet, I'm telling myself they're true. So spending time, I guess, shaping the way I think about things to be, much more integrous, I guess, like having an integrous mental model, so that when I'm experiencing pain like that, I think, how am I going to survive for the next 20 years? And then I realize that I'm having this conversation with myself where I don't really need to figure out how I'm going to be surviving for the next 20 years. So in that moment, I can let that go. You talked about Stephen Fry. I think for me, I've learned that, I believe in, a God, and I believe that I can work with God to deal with the problems that I have. I'm not on my own. So in that respect, for example, this morning, it was to, just consider that I'm not alone in this, and it wasn't actually up to me how the next 20 years were going to go. That I can do my best to influence, and I feel like I've done an incredibly good job to get to where I am in my life. And
Yeah.
if this is what I've been able to create so far, I have no idea what's possible for me in future. I
Mm.
do know that if I keep being authentic, really saying what I feel I want to say, then that's fulfilling enough for me. And yeah, it provides me enough contentment to keep me going through
Yeah.
each day, such that I've got something bigger to live for than my
Yeah.
own
Yeah.
circumstances. Yeah.
Yeah, one of the things that we see a lot, it's a kind of very common experience. As we get stuck into mundane things, the day-to-day activities we do, um, we often forget that we are alive. You know, and being alive is a thing. Now it
Mm.
comes with a package of suffering and pain here, and joy and happiness on the other side.
Yeah.
But um, sometimes when we see a degree of entitlement, it stems from this thing that we forget, that we're not the one who has given ourselves life or possibility of existence.
Mm.
It's a given, it's a gift, and we didn't have much say in how exactly that is going to be. Now, as an adult, we do have a relatively high level of autonomy, that we can be
Yeah.
responsible, or as I often say, being able to respond to the matters uh, appropriately, so that
Yeah.
it contributes to the integrity of our lives. We set our lives in such a way that it works for us as much as possible. Not being this passive victim that life is purely occurring to us, but being this active agent that no matter what percentage we can influence the matters, regardless of the source. We are not
Mm.
the source of everything. We are vulnerable to diseases. We are vulnerable to our own those self judgments, self
Yeah.
doubts. We're vulnerable to our angry neighbor or cheating partner, and we are vulnerable. That's an undeniable fact. But then at the same time, we do have this relatively high level of autonomy. We can influence things to a degree. Yeah. Now,
Yeah.
I would like to have your experience, not only as I mean, like as an individual, personal experience, but also like you work with lots of people in the past, and
Yeah,
You're in contact with lots of people
that's
that
right.
they deal with a degree of disability. Yeah,
Yeah,
so
yeah, yeah.
it's fair to say that you can represent the people that they deal with a degree of disability. Yeah,
Hmm.
so what does this responsibility means in the context of dealing with pain?
Wow, it's a good question. So, what does how does responsibility relate to dealing with pain? The ability to respond in the circumstances we find ourselves in, and the fact that I have this level of autonomy. And he talked about resentment and injustice and so on. And so certainly, I've lived the gamut of that. I've been this person who is very closed, resentful, angry, had many challenges in my 30s related to that. These days things are a little different, and chronic pain started for me maybe about 5 years ago, and it's been increasing since then. And I was very fortunate to be able to do the Royal North Shores Pain Management Clinic recently, and I learnt a lot about responsibility in that. And it came down to this thing that I learned about the way pain works, specifically neuropathic pain, which is the type of pain, chronic neuropathic pain. So it's always there. The pain is a signal that's being received by my brain and is being interpreted by my brain as pain. And if I fail to respond to that, then the brain would tend to amplify that signal so that I actually take action. And mostly in the past, when I would have that experience, I would say to myself, oh, "This pain is terrible. I don't know how I can stand it." And I'd be saying this either out loud or in my head. This was my response to how I was feeling. And what I would notice was that the pain would become more intense. And as the pain became more intense, so did my resistance to it. And as I resisted it more, now it just seemed like made perfect sense. Of course, if you are in pain, if I was to slam a hammer onto my thumb, I would scream out in pain and yell. So it made sense to be expressing all of this pain, crying or whatever it might be with this intense feeling. When I learned that, in fact, that was not the way to deal with it, that through decades of research, the pain management clinic had discovered that there was this way of being with the pain and responding to it differently.
Mm.
And the very idea that I could have an influence over how my, what I would assume to be autonomous systems, and have discovered that in fact is the case, such that now, I relate to the pain completely differently. It's not this terrible thing at
Yeah.
all. Um, that
So basically,
transform,
basically the pain is there, but then you
mm,
choose to relate to it differently.
yes, it's that simple.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's that
So,
simple,
see,
but it takes
like
time to.
when we talk about responsibility, or healthy relationship with responsibility, is like on one side is like when you're not being responsible or you relinquish control completely.
Mm,
You're not of influence
yeah,
at all,
yeah,
and you're this passive victim. Life is
yeah,
occurring to you. You have no
yeah,
say. And then there's also this other side that is still like we can call it the shadow, the other side of the shadow of your relationship with responsibility, which is like if you're this person who is a control freak, wants to impose your will, you want to impose your will onto everything. And then it's quite vulnerable. I'm pretty sure you can relate to it. Is like you go, oh, this is my body. How come I'm not in charge of that? How come the body does whatever she wants? And but the thing is, surrendering to this bigger than us, like there are things that are not necessarily in our control.
yeah,
All we can do, we can surrender to it. And then by surrendering to it, it doesn't mean that we are succumbing to its darkness.
no,
Completely the other way, like
yeah,
you acknowledge that, you
yeah,
you acknowledge that, and then you go, okay, so let me see what can I do on top of this, what part of it I can acknowledge, surrender to, and be with,
yeah,
and there, if you can actively seek areas that you can be that active agent who goes, okay, even if I can find this tiniest thread and pull so that I can steer the direction towards what I would desire, then you
Yeah.
do. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, so when it comes to pain, you said that you relate to it differently. Yeah. Because
Hmm.
as you mentioned, it's like you receive your brain, which is basically physically um, um constrained, is in your is trapped in your skull, is receiving these signals and very um, um, I mean, like it's going to lead you or force you to react. Yeah, but you mentioned the word response rather than react. Yeah. Now, when it
Mm-hmm.
comes to responding, for example, how would you contextualize proactivity, being proactive? Are there areas that you can be proactive and prepare yourself so that you can avoid the pain, or you can be prepared in responding more appropriately to the pain?
Oh, yeah. Look, absolutely, most definitely. I mean, I mean, I have been a passive victim. So when I experienced pain, I didn't understand what was going on. I'd not experienced this pain, intense pain before. It started coming on, and wasn't going away. So I was very angry and looking for someone or something to blame, and was really doing everything about not wanting to deal with it, which left me angry, bitter, and kind of stuck. Um, the thing that I learned about being able to respond was I could see what was happening without my involvement. So without my involvement, I could watch the pain intensify and start to listen to my own anxiety amplify. It was as I would start to say things like, "Oh, here we go again. This is bad." Like, and then I would be able to catch myself mid conversation and just stop and say, instead of saying those things, start to respond differently to the signals that were coming up. And the responses were things like, "This will pass soon. I know this will pass soon because it normally does. This is unhelpful nerve signals being sent from my legs to my brain and back again. It's useless information. It's not telling me anything. There's no new data here." And
Mm,
so that's a general practice. Then there's regular stretching and other exercises. And I think one of the most powerful exercises I've learned is the desensitization practice, which I
yeah,
assimilate to. It is learning to be with
yeah,
your pain without any distraction. And what I've
yeah,
noticed is that's when it becomes its most intense. And then
yeah, yeah,
I can be with it, and I can be with it for a short period of time and then a longer period of time, and noticing that I'm calm and not becoming anxious as my. So it's this reprogramming
yeah.
my signals to relax my body as opposed to have it become tense. And I
Yeah.
must say, most people see me now and they go, "Wayne, you're so relaxed."
Mm.
And I
See,
think it's
the
a
thing is, like,
byproduct.
I'm being very careful, Wayne, not to even say I understand. You know, like sometimes as courtesy, as
Hmm.
we're listening to someone going through some experience, we often say I understand. I mean, it's
Hmm.
really hard to understand. Not that I cannot conceive it to a degree. You know, I've contemplated, I've studied, I've interacted with lots of people that
Hmm.
they deal with degrees of disability. Some are very close relatives and the people that I work with, including
Yeah.
yourself. And it's really hard to say that I have a very authentic, congruent conception of how it is.
Hmm.
This experience of severe pain on a regular basis. I mean, like on a daily
Yeah.
basis.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, but so now, so that was really good to, when you brought up this conversation of relating to it differently, because we often, like from a being discourse perspective, we always say that um, your being is like the way that you relate to different matters in life and then act upon them. Yeah, how do you
Hmm.
relate to love? How do you relate to forgiveness? How do you relate to authenticity or commitment?
Yeah.
Now we can say how you relate to pain and suffering. Yeah. So would
Hmm.
you consider suffering or pain is a inherently negative phenomena, or no, there is also gems laying
Right.
under that pain. Some of our audience may find that being a little bit romantic and dreamy, but I just want to ask you:
Yeah.
is there anything um, that comes out of that pain?
Yeah. I think I've learned over the years to accept many of the things that I can't change. And so then in acceptance, I find then there's some freedom because if I can't do anything about it, so now it's this question. So now what am I going to do?
Mm,
And so there tends to be a choice that arises then. Well, I think one of the things that I find myself saying to people, and maybe it's it probably is a way I've chosen to relate to it, is I know I'm alive. I
mm,
know I'm alive every day because I've got a very um, strong indication of that.
mm,
There's not a lot of boring moments in my life. Put it that way. So in some respects, I know I'm alive, and I also feel like it's the thing that keeps me extremely humble. And I
mm,
say extremely humble, having been someone who, on the flip side, has been incredibly arrogant, righteous, resentful in the past, through lack of being able to be with the circumstances I found myself in. It was to
mm,
resist and to fight everyone. Yeah.
yeah.
So these days, I don't look at it like that. I think I'm blessed. I wouldn't change anything. I've got this constant reminder that life is not this thing that is just a piece of cake. That many people experience pain and challenges and suffering that I can't even relate to, far worse than me, and that
Mm,
I'm therefore this blessed person. And authentically, genuinely, if you ask me, that's the way I choose to look at it. I could choose the other way because I have chosen that in the past. It would be very easy
mm,
for me to go back to drinking
yeah.
alcohol, being a resentful person. It really does take
Yeah.
something to keep generating myself to be someone who
Mm,
continues to grow and develop themselves. Not only for myself, but I've got three adult children, and I want to be the type of father that they can, as a role model, go, well, that's the way
yeah.
you want to be in life. If we were dealing with difficult stuff, just look at how
Yeah.
our dad did it. He did it with some grace. So,
Yeah. Yeah, one of the things when it comes to fairness in life, because like we have this inherent expectation that life needs to be fair, which is not, at least like fair in from a humanistic perspective, yeah,
yeah,
from how
yeah,
we wanted it to be. But
yeah,
the thing is, we're not gods, and we don't have that level of autonomy. So it's like the question of why me, yeah. But when
yeah,
you're in this state of surrender, the immediate response to that is why not? I mean, like what? Like all the suffering needs to be experienced by your neighbor or the others, not you. Now, the moment that we realize that, like, there are things that it's out of control, there are things that we cannot influence to the degree that we wish, that acknowledgement again, like I want to re-emphasize that
mm,
surrendering to something doesn't mean that we're succumbing to it. Like succumbing to
no,
it is actually becoming that bitter, as you mentioned, bitter
yeah,
and resentful, and basically making the situation even worse for yourself.
yeah,
This is not an ideal situation to be in, dealing with these conditions. But then imagine that if you want to keep reiterating that on a minutely basis, whenever the signals of pain is coming, then you're going to make it even worse for yourself.
yeah,
And that's exactly where you're saying that where you can influence it is like it may not be much, but still is better than nothing. Yeah. So you choose to
yeah,
relate to it differently, as if, like, for example, we often have emotions,
yeah,
and emotions don't mean anything. It's like us when we make them mean something, and we call them feelings. And often,
yeah,
as we reiterate that, then it may set our dominant mood at the time.
hmm yeah,
So Yeah. Now, so let me take the conversation here. Obviously, like you've been, thank you very much. You've been quite vulnerable, and I think that our audience would see that, and many people that may be hearing
Thank
us,
you.
listening to us, or watching us on YouTube, would resonate with you. And there may be some people out there that they have been hiding their disability,
I
so
know what
that
that
they
feels
they can
like.
escape from those social pressure and judgment, and
Yeah,
you
yeah,
know, yeah.
yeah.
Now, so tell me about this. What was it in it when you started to own your vulnerability and come out in a way?
Mm,
Yeah.
mm,
From some
mm.
moment, like you go, you know what? I can't just like not leave. I cannot leave in the closet. I need to come out. I need to
Yeah,
embrace how I am being.
yeah.
Um, how was that like? Like, what was your experience with that? And
Like
what's in it
pulling
for a
teeth.
person? Yeah. Sorry,
Yeah,
what?
like it was like pulling teeth. Like it's
Mm,
it's very challenging. So, and I speak as a 58-year-old Australian male, right? So I
mm,
grew up in an environment where men were a certain way, and so I think for me it felt like we talked about surrender versus succumbing. Initially it felt like succumbing. It felt like I was going to have to. That's one of the biggest challenges I had. For example, was I received funding from the NDIS to have a house cleaner come. It took me
mm,
years
yeah.
to get a house cleaner because I just couldn't be this person who has a cleaner come because I can't clean my own house. So
Yeah.
this resistance to accepting the support that was free to me, I look at it now, I think that's insanity. That is just someone being too
So
proud
basically, you
or,
mean that you put so much more pressure on yourself by not acknowledging it or not wanting that to be revealed.
yeah,
Um, it just costed you more, like you put all those pressure on yourself, not, for
yep,
example, using the services available.
yep,
Um, yeah.
yep.
Okay.
And look, and in so many other areas, not getting the support from many of the opportunities that may have been available because I had been this person who had been in denial for such a long time. I mean, my condition is
Yeah.
degenerative and it's a hidden condition. So, I mean, if I can't see it and it's only getting worse, then why would I want to tell anybody or. So it was a
Mm,
secret shame that I had to carry. And if I let someone know that I needed help, well, then suddenly I wasn't this person that I thought I was anymore. So
mm,
it was that, but then what happened, of course, is it was the cleaners. I had the cleaners come, and I realised this is just great. My house is clean. I didn't have to lift a finger,
mm,
and the NDIS paid for it. So
yeah.
that became something that I started to value, and then I started to open up
Mm,
to, well, I want if this is an opportunity, and I've been
yeah.
so
Yeah.
pig-headed or stiff-necked about this, then what other
Yeah.
opportunities are there? And that's when I started to really
So,
open up
so I
and
would I would
just,
say like the more sense of freedom, your self expression, you didn't need to put so much effort in maintaining that forced persona that you were projecting out
that's
there. And
right.
then you go
Yep.
like into your solitude, and then you're a different person.
Yeah.
And then obviously, like the moment, yes, there are people out there that they may be judgmental or whatever, or some may want to convey sympathy, which you may not prefer that. Yeah, no one wants to be
Yeah.
to see others feeling sorry for them. But then on the
Yeah.
other side, there are people that they can show empathy, be compassionate, and be support. Like this vulnerability on the positive end would have these opportunities for you so that you can tap into other people's resources or what's basically available, as you
Yeah.
mentioned.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I
Now,
think that
but
that is the
yeah, go
journey
on.
I've been on. I mean, I have an electric bike. I might have mentioned it before, and that
Yeah.
was one of the areas where I was resisting the notion of needing support, mobility support. The idea of
Mm,
getting in one of those little cars and driving around. I just thought, well, I can't do.
mm,
I'm not an old man.
yeah.
And then, yeah, by being proactive, and this is at a point where I've now started to realise that there's maybe opportunities for me that I haven't explored. And
Yeah.
I got in touch with an organisation that supported me in putting in an application for mobility assistance, and so I ended up with this electric bike. Now that has been an absolute blessing to me in being able to do so many things: fishing, you know, towing my kayak around, look, doing so many things that I wouldn't be able to do
Yeah.
that I otherwise would never have even looked at, and would be literally
Yeah.
sitting here
Yeah.
complaining about how difficult it was for me to get from A to B. Right,
Sure.
so that's the
Sure.
difference. I think there's being
Yeah.
at the effect of all those things, as opposed to looking at what
Yeah.
opportunities there might be, however small, to move
Yeah.
forward.
Sure. So, no, thank you. Thank you very much, Wayne, for your vulnerability in sharing all these. Now, but up to very recently, you've been working with lots of individuals
Hmm.
in coaching capacities, and now I know that your current condition has impacted that, and then you're making certain significant changes. But so, and you work with lots of people in organizations, and especially nowadays. The inclusion and diversity has become a
Mm.
very very important thing. Like many different organizations are actually thinking about it, they're
Yeah.
taking actions around it. It's becoming a very very important thing. Um so what was your experience working with people in organizations around the inclusion of people with disability?
Uh, yeah, it's a little bit of a sensitive subject, but I'll just tell you how I feel and what I think about it. Yeah, look, I think a lot of people are still very constricted in their ability to express what's actually going on for them for fear of judgment, existing stigmas. Um, it appears to me that many of the efforts that are being put in the corporate workplace uh, and even small businesses in some instance have an impact insofar as that they do provide, I guess, a way of addressing, raising awareness of the different circumstances people may be dealing with. Although I find in my own experience, it tends to be one where there's a position taken that someone like me isn't actually 100% capable and therefore needs assistance or like some compensation. And that's not the way I see it. Um, so I think there's certainly an opportunity to raise awareness in the workplace about the myriad of medical conditions that people deal with that may impact their lives in either small or significant way. If you have a medical condition that impacts you significantly, that's considered a disability. So, if my belief is that we do need to raise awareness about hidden disabilities, specifically about the way people want to be honoured for themselves being whole and complete, as opposed to being considered someone who is missing something and needs something extra to be supported. Um, I think that's a big mistake. I feel like having people, it's that sympathy thing. It's like people want to come and help because they feel sorry, right? Except there's nothing to feel sorry for. It's more a case of I've got these skills. I've got specific skills that maybe other people don't have. The fact that I've got chronic pain, I'll let you know how that how you may be able to best work with me as an individual if I'm part of a team, as opposed to having that prescribed by uh, policy or maybe sort of constructed mechanisms to provide safety, which in fact all they do is shut down.
Yeah, yeah, I think that I also have seen in working with some organizations, like sometimes, unfortunately, like this inclusion and diversity is turning into this thing that they want to have certain tokens, like they use certain people as tokens. I've been in organizations that they deliberately, at least that's my understanding, that deliberately they would have like this person on a wheelchair and they would put them right at the entry point so that whoever comes into this organization they would see this person. And as a
Yeah,
matter of the fact, like in that particular scenario, I knew that like very likely this person was employed as a cosmetic employer or something. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's not very comfortable conversation to talk about these days around this, but I think unfortunately that happens. But there, and what you're saying is perhaps there's no need for that. Um, uh,
Mm.
a person with disability is capable
Yeah.
of different things, depends on their qualities or qualifications and the skill sets and experiences.
Yeah.
Now, the fact that they're dealing with chronic pain or certain conditions, that doesn't make them fully unqualified for certain jobs. Now, it may get in the way of doing certain work, and then I think that that should be taken into consideration. But and that basically means that the person who's dealing with the certain conditions, they also need to take that into consideration so that they can create a kind of an integration with their occupation, isn't it? Like
Yeah.
you, if you
Absolutely.
have that level of self awareness, like what sort of conditions are you going to go through,
Yeah.
very likely it's better for you to choose certain occupation that then it may be more aligned, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, I recall doing quite a bit of research some time ago, which talked about the lack of disability in the workplace because of
Mm,
misconception, where there are in fact scenarios where you may have someone who has to do repetitive data entry, or and is someone who has maybe has attention deficit syndrome, is able to actually work very effectively in certain scenarios where they're
yeah.
probably more effective than others. And there's millions of scenarios like that where you see it's not a
And
disability. It's you see I've got all these other skills that I've
mm,
developed because I've got these things that I have to deal with. Similarly, if someone is blind, you often hear that they can hear much better. So I
yeah,
believe, my business is called Mighty Ability. It's not called disability. It's about that we've got these gifts and we need to focus on the gifts that we have, not the
yeah.
things that other people think are missing.
So you yourself are a really good example. Like up to sir, I mean, very recently, you were working more with people one on one. You were working with teams more directly.
Yeah,
But then, with certain conditions that you're going through at the moment, like then you're focusing more on content generation and knowledge sharing, which basically doesn't necessarily need you to be like real time. You be working with
yeah,
people, but basically
yeah,
you can take your time and then you can produce your content and develop things. And that's exactly where we're creating opportunity with you. You're
exactly.
doing your book chapter in Being Matters series and
Yeah,
actually talking to disability inclusion and dealing with pain. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, exactly. Well, it's a good
Yeah.
example, isn't it? Yeah. So there's this moment in
Yeah.
time where I'm, working with groups, with Anglicare, and I'm working with individuals, and I'm really loving what I'm doing, and then that just stops, right? And then
Yeah.
everything changes. And now, am I? Oh dear, that's the end of the world. That's and for a little bit I was, wow,
Yeah.
I've spent so much time building this as a client, and that all stopped. But
Yeah.
then there was another opportunity. It's what's next,
By the way,
and then
like Wayne, I think let me add this to it. So this is not only the condition that the people with disability deal with, like and
mm,
that's inherent in entrepreneurship. Like whoever is
yeah,
building businesses, they need to be quite responsive to
mm,
rapidly changing world. The
yeah,
market changes, the demands from people would change, the economy change, technology advances, and like constantly, you need to be ready if you want to stay in your business and you want to grow. You need to change, and this is a perfect example of that. Then, if you
yeah,
lose certain abilities that you have, then just create different product, provide different offerings and focus on
yeah.
different things. It reminds me of this famous book by Spencer Johnson, Who Moved My Cheese. When I was a teenager, actually, I read the book. Have you read it? Do you know that?
Yeah, I have. Yeah, well, a long time ago.
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
struggling to remember, but
So
who made my
yeah,
cheese?
if
Yeah,
if
yeah.
the source of your food, which is like metaphorically in the story, is cheese, you don't want to stock there, and then you don't get a stock there, and then you go after new cheese. Yeah.
Mm, mm, yeah,
Okay. So now, So in your chapter in the Being Metas series of book that we're publishing, it's not
Yeah.
published yet, but
No.
soon we'll publish them this year. So you titled it so far like accepting disability for a fulfilled life. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now,
Yeah.
so yeah, so where that was coming from, like you thought that people with disability like yourself may succumb to this thing that they may not be able to fulfill their intentions or having living a fulfilled life due
Yeah.
to the disability or certain conditions they have. So, what is your
Yeah.
message?
Yeah, well, I guess the message came about not only through my own experience of my life and how much of a difference it made when I began to accept things, like the accepting, for example, that having a cleaner in was a good idea. So I think learning to be with the way things are and the way things are not is an opportunity, as we've been discussing, to decide what to do next. If I'm not willing to accept my current circumstances, which is something that I did, then I found myself fighting against those circumstances in what occurred as a never-ending battle. There was no winning that battle. There was no overcoming anything. The only thing that there
Yeah.
was to do was to surrender. But that sounded like a stupid idea because if I've been trying to battle and overcome, surrendering sounds like the last thing you'd want to do until I
Mm.
realized that surrendering wasn't, that acceptance and surrender were a similar thing and they were about letting go of some of the things that
Yeah.
I'd been hanging on to. So
Yeah.
my message to people is there's likely things in your life that you're unwilling to accept and you probably don't even know about it. Have a look at
Mm.
the areas you deeply care about and are you fulfilled in the areas that you care most about? If you're not, then it's likely there's something that you're hanging on to that it's probably time you let go of. Particularly people
Mm.
living with disability, I think there's this sense of injustice, having probably been wronged many times by many people. You just heard me talk about a couple of examples in the last week, and that's
Yeah.
only when I'm conscious of it, right? So you imagine that's going on all the time, and you've been beaten down by this societal stigma of being this person. So
Yeah.
it does take an immense amount of uh, courage and fortitude to realize that you are someone that can, I love what we say, just grab the tiniest little thread and pull on it.
Mm.
Because I tell you, that's what I do all the time. Because it's usually,
Yeah.
it's either a tiny little crack of light or it's a little something that I can grab onto. But unless I
Yeah.
hang on to something that I can influence, then I'm lost. And I think for
Yeah.
me, it's, we all have this ability to make choices and decisions in our
Yeah.
life. And if you're not clear about the choices and decisions that you're making that are giving you the type of life that you're maybe suffering in right now, particularly if you're living with a disability, there are many opportunities. Some of my articles, some of the stuff that we're doing in future, many opportunities to start to look at things differently. And as you've so
Sure.
eloquently put, Ashkan, it really is just looking at it differently. But it
Yeah.
takes it's not that simple. I just change your perspective. But then again, there's some great tools, the perspective quadrant, the web of perceptions. There's some of the tools that we use in the framework. I've personally found to be uh, just excellent for shaping my conception of how things are, because
Yeah.
I'm able to have a new model that supports me in moving forward rather than being stuck. So it's about having tools that allow me to let go of the things I no longer need and tools
Yeah.
to pick up the things that maybe would be helpful for me, like being more open and being more courageous.
Yeah.
There's always this opportunity to develop those important characteristics and traits.
Sure, sure. Yeah. No, thank you. So, yeah, if I want to recap basically what I can see myself from this conversation is like we're not gods, we're not the ones who give life to ourselves. That's a gift. We embrace it. It
Yeah.
comes with a package. It's a package that
Mm.
involves suffering, pain. We may find it not pleasant, and we may be fully rightful, like in that. But
Mm.
it's a degree of forgiveness and giving up being right about that. And then we discussed surrendering to the things that we
Yeah.
cannot really control. And that doesn't mean that we're encouraging anyone to succumb to the circumstances. It's more the acknowledgement so that then you can see, with freedom, you can see options, what you can do about it,
Yep.
and minimize the amount of suffering, whatever it is. And and this thing that often we see that people say, I'm fighting this and that, so that
Mm.
fighting or resistance, it actually makes it worse. And that's
Yeah.
exactly why, I think, we discussed like the state of surrender, and that acknowledgement, so that you can move forward, and minimize the suffering. Wayne, thank you very much. It was really a pleasure having you here. I hope that,
Thank you, mate.
our audience benefit from what you shared, both from your personal experiences as a person who has first-hand experience going through chronic pains and disability, and also we discussed how, people at the workplace, or like the people with disability at the workplace, they may experience things, and we had your messages, to companies or organizations out there with regards to that. Any
Mm.
final message that you want to give our audience?
Well, because I'd love to say something very profound that would solve everyone's problems in an instant. I guess it's always a work in progress. I've been applying myself for most of my life and getting to where I am, and it's only now that I'm starting to really see the reward. So I'd say, it is it's not a short process to transform your life, and it's certainly one though that's very much worthwhile to go from suffering to being able to be with pain, and have it mean something significant to me in terms of as opportunity. Then I mean that's the transformation, and being someone who really wants to support other people who are in the same place suffering, that gives me a great deal of fulfillment as well. So for me, it's a purely positive phenomena. So thank you very much, Ashton.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Wayne. We'll put your details, like your Ingenesis platform partner page, up
Yep,
there. And
yep,
yeah, so awesome. Thank you.
fantastic.
Thank you very
Thank you,
much, Wayne. And thank you very much, everyone.
thank you.